My name's Will, and I'm from the Tree Council. And first, a little bit of housekeeping. So this is going to be about an hour and a half long. And what we're going to do today is that we're going to have we've got myself and three other people who are going to be doing a bit of talking. And what we'll do is that we'll each do our sections, and then there'll be a bit of a question and answer after each one. We've got Matt from Shinfield St Mary's, which is a primary school in Reading. We've got Karen Dunlop from Easton College, and we've got our own Phil Paolo talking to us today. So all of our sessions are recorded and on our YouTube channel, so you can watch those afterwards. As we're going along here today, you'll notice in the bottom of your screen that there is a chat function and a question and answer function. If you can pop any questions that you have as we go along into the question and answer box, that'd be great, and then we can cover those as we come to the question and answer sections. Okay, so if you're completely new to the Tree Council, we're a national charity and we bring everybody together for the love of trees. So we do that in a number of different ways. We fund, plant, and care for trees and hedgerows with our amazing tree warden network all across the country and different communities. We do that through our community grant schemes. So yeah, big hello to any tree wardens that are out there today. Thank you for everything you do. We inspire the next generation of environmentalists because we are through our national schools program. So if there's any young tree champions out there or teachers, we're really glad to see you there today as well. And we use practical science and research, and we do this in order to be able to influence national policy and support best practice on trees in the environment and make sure that what's happening out in the field is actually what we want, and it is based on the latest research and evidence. And we bring it all together by harnessing the power of partnership. We work with amazing partner organisations, and our aim is to be able to create a healthy tree-filled future. I'll pop in a few links in the chat, which will include a link to our website if you've not been there before. And this session today is part of our hedgerows project, which is called Life in the Hedge, and it's all about raising awareness of our amazing hedgerows, all they do for us. We're trying to create more better connected hedgerows, promote better hedgerow management across the country. And to be able to do that, we're funded by the Trees Call to Action Fund. It's a national fund. It's developed by DEFRA and the Forestry Commission and delivered to us through the National Lottery Heritage Fund. It's a bit of a mouthful, but that's the way it works. And it's we've got huge hedgerow planting targets at the moment, and being able to grow your own trees and supply your own trees can only help in our bid to kind of improve our hedgerow network across the country. So if you're new to this, or if you want a little catch up, so this is where we're up to in our calendar of helpful online talks to help us through our tree growing journey. So our aim is that by the end of this series of sessions, you'll have a calendar of sessions which you can kind of look at together and rewatch through our YouTube channel, which enables you to be able to have a go at growing your own trees and maybe even setting the seeds to create new community tree nurseries going forward. So our next talk is on the 24th September, which is called Growing Up. Which is called A Place for Their Own. Ooh. Which is called A Place for Their Own. And this is where we talk about choosing the right places to grow your trees and to plant your trees and link up with local tree planting projects and make sure that those trees are going to a good home. So we'll send a link of this recording around after the talk, as well as a feedback form. And keep an eye on our socials for more information about these events as well. But you can sign up. We'll send the sign up link around as well, so you can sign up to it as and when you can. So before we get going, just a few resources that it's always good to mention to people. So we've got a couple of excellent resources which support these sessions. We've got the Tree Grows Guide and the Young Tree Grows Guide, and these are online, and they offer tree growing guidance at different levels of where you're up to in tree growing journey. They're both really great. The Young Tree Grows Guide's a bit more of an introduction for growing trees from seed, and it's aimed at school children, but it's got absolutely tons of useful things that actually anybody who's growing trees could use. It's got kind of activities and lesson plans and things like that, but it's really informative. And it's a great starting point. And then we've got the Tree Grows Guide, which is a bit more detailed and kind of can help you set up a fully fledged community tree nursery. and it's got some brilliant sections in it on tree ID and what trees need different types of treatment, when to pick seeds, all that kind of thing, and then how you go about actually growing those trees from seeds. So check both of those out, and there'll be links in the chat in a bit. And then there is a wider support network of existing community tree nurseries across the whole of the UK called the Community Tree Nursery Collaborative. And yeah, like I say, this is a collective of community tree nurseries and individuals growing seeds all over the UK. They're all passionate about growing trees, and it's headed up by the Fellowship of the Trees, Code and Fact, More Trees, Special Branch, and the Tree Musketeers. And these are all existing tree nurseries. And this group offers a kind of a peer-to-peer learning network, and they've got a huge amount of experience and knowledge, and they're amazing to be able to pick the brains off. So, and they've got absolutely loads of webinars and things on their YouTube channel. So we'll send those links around. Their Facebook page is kind of what they operate through, and it's a great place to be able to ask questions to get information from the experts, really. So, and if you've got any questions about how to grow particular trees, or how you can go about setting up your own community tree nursery, or why is this not working, it's pop it in their Facebook group, and somebody will get back to you, or lots of people get back to you. So there's loads of knowledge, and they've got some upcoming sessions coming as well, and we'll ping round the link to where you can sign up to any of their online sessions as well. So today, what we're going to do is that we are going to be looking at activities that we do at this time of year. So things like watering, feeding, weeding, protecting, and forecasting. And we're going to be hearing from Matt at Shinfield St Mary's Junior School, Karen from Karen from Easton College, and then our own Phil for our jobs for the weekend. But I thought what we do to kick off is that we'll share a video which Matt has put together. It's only a few minutes long, and then we'll go to some questions for Matt.
Shinfield St Mary's Junior School is located just outside of Reading, and it has 360 pupils. The school is an outstanding beacon school for the Tree Council, and we recently celebrated planting our 5,000th tree. There are a number of different trees that grow on this site, ranging from the willow ossia to willow fencing, to willow archways, to mature trees, and of course the community nursery. There are currently 5,400 trees on our site. 3,000 of these line the perimeter of the fence, 2,000 are within a Miyawaki forest, 400 are within our community tree nursery. The two newest features of our school are the willow fence and the outdoor classroom. We've tried to strike a fine balance between keeping the trees alive and encouraging wildlife. So this involves mulching around the trees, but also planting wildflower meadows. Aside from the native trees, we've also planted some specimen trees. My favourite tree, the Lebanese cedar, the dawn redwood, and soon to be a monster, a giant sequoia. Continuing on our sustainability journey, we also have 52 fruit trees, which are located across the site and range from everything from apple all the way up to medlar. Complementing our trees, we also have wildflower beds, hugelkultures, 24 raised beds, and also a bottle greenhouse. Enough from me, let's go and find out all about keeping the trees alive from the children of the school.
This is our tree nursery. We've grown over 400 trees here, and they're going to go to the community. Our trees are irrigated so that they survive through the dry season.
Recently, we have planted wildflowers in a meadow. This will help increase the population of pollinators.
This is our Miyawaki forest. We've planted over 2,000 trees here. We irrigate the trees in the dry season to make sure they stay healthy.
It is very important to weed around the base of your trees because weeds fight for water and the nutrients which the tree needs.
This is our mulch store. We use this mulch to care for our trees.
After you read it, it's very important to mulch around the tree.
This can stop weeds from growing and evaporation. Also, don't pile up the mulch at the base of the tree because it can damage it.
Sometimes you use mulch mats instead of mulch.
We don't know how effective they are, so come back next year and we'll tell you.
Learning about trees is really important to us because it helps animals and humans. And in our eco lessons, we learn how to care for them and look after them.
It's been great having a connection with nature during our school day.
It's been really great connecting with nature. I think more people should get out there and plant trees.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Matt. And we're joined by Matt Knight now. So, hi, Matt. I believe you're hiding on your school in the corner somewhere.
Yeah, between the Miyawaki and the fence line. It's the coolest place. Trees are brilliant.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks so much for putting that video together. And I think it was really nice to be able to see. It's really nice to see the way that you're growing trees, but also the way it fits into all the other activities that you're doing across the whole of your school. If anybody's got any questions for Matt, if you want to pop them in the chat now, but don't worry if you don't think of them now and you think of them later on. If you send them to me and I'll circulate my email address, then I can pass them on to Matt and we can answer them together. But from my point of view, Matt, a few quick questions. How did you get started with tree growing? What was the idea and how did you get started?
Yeah, I guess probably the fruit trees were the first things to appear. Of my own charity, Pretty Free. So that started the whole journey. But then from that, we got trees from the Woodland Trust, a rather large number of them. So we planted those out. And then I think the big turning point was probably when I became involved with the Tree Council, because we planted the orchard for schools, got involved that way. We put in a hedgerow as well. And then they were contacted to say, would you like some more trees? We're thinking about doing a project in your area, and that's how the Miyawaki sort of came about. And now, just in front of me, we have 2,000 trees up on the hill. So that was, I think, the catalyst to get us going. And then from that, it was the community tree nursery, which came from that. It's quite hard to get decent quality trees, apart from obviously from either the Woodland Trust or from the Tree Council. So we thought growing our own would probably be a good way to share with our neighbours. So we're 1 year into that project now.
Amazing, thanks, Matt. Got a couple of questions here. So you mentioned where you source some of your trees from. Is there a network for school teachers wanting to start out on this journey?
Yeah, for sure. Well, with us, I guess. So yeah, if you contact the Young Tree Champions, you go to the Tree Council's education arm online, sign the school up. And depending on where your school is, if you're in the south of England or South Wales, you'll get my shiny little head turning up and saying hello. We'll see where you are and trying to to get you going. If it's in Scotland, it'll be Louisa. Grania is North Wales. We've got Emma who covers Midlands-ish, and then we have currently over on the East Coast. We've got one at the moment, but that'll be mine as well, I think, soon. So yeah, there are 5 of us, and we will get in contact with you. But I think really speak to your local tree wardens as well. They're a really great source. And just have a look on. You type in the name of your town, put trees with it, see what comes up. That's you find there are quite a few different organisations already in operation. So it's about making the links, I guess.
Brilliant, yeah. And yeah, just to repeat, yeah, please do get in touch with the Tree Council, get in touch with us. And yeah, talk to our Young Tree Champion leads, and they'll be more than happy to start a conversation with you. And then for any further kind of detailed questions about community tree nurseries, you can always ask the Community Tree Nursery Collaborative. They're a really good bank of how to do these things as well. Conscious of time, there's one here which is, where do you get your mulch from, and what's the mulch made of? Is wood chip okay to use? We'll cover the wood chip in a little bit in this presentation, but if you could just mention where you get your mulch from.
Yeah, sure. So for our school, we're very fortunate. We're in if your local borough has ambitious targets, which Woking Borough does, they have a target of 250,000 trees. So obviously we've planted a whack of those, 5,000 here in this school. Had the conversation with the lead for that project, and they're more than happy to provide us with guards, stakes, mulch. So that was all free, which is amazing in itself, you know. So yeah, it's brilliant if you can get it for free. If you can't, I think you know you're going to talk about this in a minute. But local arborists, if you're in a school, you will have at least one child whose dad or uncle or neighbour who is a tree arborist, and they will always be looking to offload their wood chip because they have to obviously pay to dispose of it otherwise. So it's about again checking your networks and seeing what's available.
Okay, we've got just time for one more. So Anne from Wallasey, hi Anne, nice to see you. Has said, how do you grow in leaf litter? Do you add anything else?
No, so obviously we had very success rates. We've been doing it for 2 years. First year was an abject failure. We put them all in compost, put them all in pots, put them in trays, and they all drowned. That was a real schoolboy error. We wanted to make sure they had enough water, but it turned out they had too much. We got the fungus gnats moved in, and it was horror show. So after that, we started to have a look. We looked in the tree growers guide, and actually things like nuts, like acorns, conkers, you know, all of those type of things, hazelnuts, all of them do a lot better in leaf mold. That's naturally kind of what they would be growing in the wild, I guess. They fall on the floor, get covered by leaves. So all we did was we got a load of old bread trays, and we stacked up the leaves, got them wet, and then mixed in amongst that. We mixed in the different nuts, and then covered it. The only downside, the only problem you're really going to have with that method is mice. We've lost so many to a rather fat mouse that seems to be able to squeeze into the tiniest of gaps. So that's the only downside. But otherwise, really high germination numbers, especially with acorns and with conkers, especially those two. They absolutely love leaf litter. But so yeah, it's a case just keeping it moist but not drowned. I think it's easier to do in leaves because the water will run off it, whereas if you've got soil, it tends to hold it a lot longer, and then when it freezes. So for me, I found that the success rate with leaf litter is pretty high.
Brilliant, thanks for that. And actually, there's one more, which I think is a really important one, which is who took the lead on the project? Was it a staff member or an external person?
So yeah, I guess that can be me, Mr. Ben, with one of my hats. So I'm lucky in this school. So for 8 years, we've been teaching ecology and sustainability, which is kind of unusual. A lot of schools do forest training, but we actually, go a slightly different paths of that. So yeah, I've been doing that for 8 years, and so yeah, I guess I now obviously regional lead for the Tree Council as well, but that was born out of the stuff I was doing in school. So it is important, I think, to have somebody on the ground in your school. Doesn't have to be a teacher, doesn't even need to be a TA, as long as you can get an adult. I would say our children are very, very great at helping, but it does need to have an overarching adult in charge of the whole project, I would say, until especially primary level anyway. So yeah, you need at least, I'd say, one person. The more the merrier, but at least one.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Matt. And you get in touch with our National Schools Programme for any information about that. We'll see how we can help. But Matt, I know you've got to go, and you've got a class in a few minutes, so I'm going to let you run. But thank you so much for all your help.
I'm usually working on a Tuesday. Normally, I would be Tree Council today, but I'm at St. Pagan's this week, so yeah, I'm covering a class. So yeah, I'm going to have to go and do some maths. How much fun can they have? Okay, thank you very much. Will.
Thanks so much. See you in a bit.
Thank you.
Bye, Matt.
Bye then.
Okay. So that was brilliant from Matt there. So we'll get started with some of the basics, really. So first of all, let's think about each time we do these sessions. I think it's always good to think about the process of growing trees from seed in a nutshell, and to know where we're up to in the year-round cycle. So we've got a mature tree which flowers at this time of year. Then we go towards the autumn, and it produces fruit, which we then collect, and the fruit drops, and we collect them, and we do various things to them, leave them and care for them, and make sure they germinate, and then we grow them into a young tree in our community tree nurseries, grow them on a bit, and then we plant them out, and they become a tree, so a full-grown tree. So at this time of year, we're focusing on these two sections here, which are keeping trees which are germinated and growing alive and well over these summer months, which can be quite problematic, and that's for a number of reasons. So last session, we were talking about what you might need in your community tree nursery, what you might need from the space and the ground, the kind of soil conditions and things like that. We went into biosecurity. So if you're new to biosecurity, please do watch that section. And we discussed that stressors or things that will inhibit healthy growth of our trees are kind of split into two things: living and non-living. So non-living, what we call abiotic stressors, and this could be things like not enough water and drought. It could be like too much sun and heat stress. It could be too much water and it's waterlogged, too windy, they're getting blown all over, not enough food, lack of nutrients. And biotic wise, living things, we're thinking of weeds, things that are going to compete for resources, and then things that are going to eat the trees. So pests like mammals, so things like this deer here, or rabbits are very fond to young trees. I should point out that the robin isn't a pest; it's just in that picture because it was in that picture. And then we've got diseases and things, so things that fungal diseases and viruses and these kind of things, and molds, things like that. But this time of year, we're probably going to be looking at things associated with too much sun, drought, maybe the opposite, a bit of waterlogging if we've watered too much, and we'll come on to that now. And things like weeds, which grow really fast at this time of year. But I thought it'd be good to put in a slide here about the different tree species tolerances, and you can kind of work these out if you go and look at where trees grow, what different tree species grow in the wild, and you'll see where different species tend to be, and where they tend to be and where they're growing well tends to give you an inclination of what they might prefer. So you've got things like, let's just take we're not going to go through all of them. I'll take a couple of examples. Let's talk about beech. So beech is a big forest plant, and it grows in these super dense canopies where there's lots and lots of shade. So it's got to grow in the shade, in the kind of quite low light conditions. Those woodlands tend to hold a lot of moisture, so the soils are still quite moist all year round. So it doesn't like drought, so it's sensitive to drought, but it's sensitive to sun because they wouldn't necessarily grow out in the open. And then they tend where they best grow, they like free draining soil. So if you notice where they grow in the wild, you quite often see them on the side of hills, places with good drainage. So they're quite sensitive to waterlogging. If you look at something like a common alder, which is a pioneer species and grows along waterways, it's not necessarily overly sensitive to sun because that's the location it grows in. It grows in these open areas with this pioneer species that's moving into these spaces. It's not so sensitive to waterlogging because that's where it likes to grow, but it is sensitive to drought because it likes wet environments. And you can kind of look at where all these species are growing, and then that gives you a bit of an inclination of what the conditions might like. And there's a really interesting document which is a bit techy, and a lot of arboriculturists use it, called species selector for green infrastructure, and we'll send a link round to it. It's a PDF document which tree planters, landscape architects, arboriculturists can use to kind of look at how different trees grow and the growing conditions they might like. We'll send the link round. But creating the conditions to be absolutely perfect for all of your tree species would take ages and probably isn't realistic. So we want a happy medium, and we talked about this last time. So a happy medium for good growth. So we want free draining but moisture holding soil. Want a neutral, slightly acidic soil. Potentially a little bit of shade, or some shade and shelter that we can bring over to our trees to make sure they're not getting scorched in the middle of the day. And we want a good spacing between the two. But we covered that in our last session. So we'll talk about a little bit about watering. So watering is essential for tree growth unless you live in a very extremely rainy area. But even then, containerized trees and things are still quite likely to need watering. The key here is to water the soil deeply and do not waterlog it, because this can suffocate the roots, and then they'll die off, and they'll provide a breeding ground for waterborne diseases. And trees in the ground will hold on to water better than trees in containers. So watering wise, got a number of different options. You can you got have a tap with a with either a to get water for a watering can, or you can use a water butt and collect it from roofs. You obviously you can use a hose. You could have an irrigation system. So Matt, who we've just seen, has an irrigation system which goes into their greenhouse and polytunnel and automatically waters their trees. A little bit fancy, but especially in somewhere like schools where there's not a lot of people around over the kind of summer holiday months, something like an irrigation system in that situation might be really useful, because otherwise somebody would need to get into the school and it might be a bit tough. So you can use an irrigation system. You can either use a leaky pipe, which is just a pipe with holes cut into it where you want it to, or you could use a drip system where it's a bit more techy and it's kind of the nozzles are pointing exactly where you want to. And there's another option which is called damping down, and that is in polytunnels or greenhouses, and that's simply either leaving open a big water vat or spraying the hose on the floor rather than the plants. And what that does is that it just increases the humidity a little bit and provides some better growing conditions. But I should say with that, we need to make sure that our polytunnels and our greenhouses are well ventilated. We don't want them to be too moist and too humid for too long, because that can also be great conditions for things like molds and mildew and things to grow. So we want to be conscious that we don't want to make it too wet for our trees. So outside for trees in the ground, maybe water them once or twice a week, and in containers maybe every 1 to 2 days. But you might need to increase this in drought conditions, or if you get an absolutely deluge, think, okay, well maybe I'm going to skip this round. But then, yeah, check your soil. That's always really important. And if you can create a chart to track your watering, then you can avoid over or under watering, hopefully. So some basics to watering. It can be one of the most time-consuming and badly executed activities at any nursery or garden. Applying too much or too little can stress the plants out. So ideally, you should water your trees very early, before the heat of the day, or in the late afternoon after the heat of the day is passed. This kind of ensures that the sun won't evaporate most of the water before it gets to the tree roots, and it can also avoid something that we call leaf scorch, which is when you see foliage turning brown and curling up and shriveling. It can be due to leaf scorch and drying winds and drought and things like that. But water sitting on the leaves can sometimes cause leaf scorch because it magnifies the sun. Watering foliage late in the day can lead to fungi and mold developing. So if you're going to water the foliage earlier on in the day, if you do it in the evening, it's more likely to linger and not evaporate off, and it's probably potentially going to sit there overnight and potentially become a bit of a breeding ground. And yeah, we want to make sure that our soil is moist to a depth of over 5 centimeters. We don't want this very narrow band moist at the top and then everything else is dry. So it's better to do infrequent soaking of the soil rather than frequent shallow watering. If you just have shallow watering, it can promote very just shallow rooting. It can also be lead to pooling and water not getting down into the bottom, and then you can have things like you have your molds and mosses and things which might interfere with your tree. You can improve the soil. So if you think, oh, my soil's not very good, it's not very free draining and things, they can be improved with kind of organic material and grit and things. And yes, you should always remember that pots and root trainers probably need watering a little bit more. But we covered some of the basics of what soil conditions you might need in the previous session. So please do have a look at that. So yeah, signs of underwatering and overwatering. So they kind of overlap a little bit, but if you're seeing kind of wilting and curling of leaves, drooping of branches, crispy edges of leaves going brown, if your tree's not growing very much, and it's getting some of your leaves are dropping, cracks in the soil, these are all signs potentially of underwatering. I mean, there are crossovers with overwatering, so yellowing leaves, wilting of leaves, poor growth, leaf drop, these kind of things. But look for the obvious signs. You know, is the soil obviously wet? are the things growing there which you might think, okay, that's a wet loving plants, things like fungi, molds, moss growing on the soil. These could all suggest that there's overwatering. So that can then help us think about, okay, which trees need what. And then there's feeding. So trees are like us and they need kind of key nutrients to survive. And if we planted our trees in good compost, or we've enriched our soil with compost and organic material, we might not need to worry too much about nutrients as they might be in there. But adding additional feed can really help young trees grow healthy and strong. And there's lots of different nutrients and micronutrients that do varying things, but some of the key ones to think of, and you might have seen it's on fertilizer if you bought it in the garden centre, with nitrogen N, phosphorus P, and potassium K. So sometimes you might look on a pot and it might say NPK, and that's what it means: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Nitrogen's what plants need to produce chlorophyll, which obviously is what plants need to photosynthesize. So it's really important to create energy, keeping those leaves nice and green. Phosphorus is really important for the transferring of energy throughout the plant, and it's really important to create healthy roots, flowers, seeds, that kind of thing. And potassium is needed for good water movement within the tree, as well as being really good for disease resistance. And you can see some of the deficiencies in them, in these nutrients, in the leaves. And it can help you narrow down what is wrong with a tree. So if you've looked at your tree and you've gone through the symptoms for under and over watering, and you're like, okay, well, it's not underwater, it's not overwatered, but it might have some of the yellowing of leaves. This on the right here is potentially a bit of nitrogen deficiency. You might get some dark green leaves with purplish tinges around them. That could be a phosphorus deficiency. Again, there are crossovers, so it is quite difficult to say. But yellowing for potassium, yellowing and browning of leaf edges and tips. All these things we might just want to think about, because we think, okay, we might want to feed our plants, because all deficiencies in these can cause poor growth, and they're a bit like us. If we're run down, we get an infection. Trees are exactly the same. If they're growing in poor conditions and need a little bit something, they're going to get infected as well. It's like us eating too much fast food and then getting ill because we haven't got the right nutrients. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because Phil's going to cover this later, but you can make your own nutrients from things that you might have lying around in the nursery or within collectible reach. So that's tea tree, but tree tea. But Phil's going to talk about that in a bit, so I won't dwell on that. And you can it's a great time to be creating your own compost. So adding things like weeded material to create something that's really nutritious, that you can either spread around your trees to improve the nutrients and the soil conditions, or also to suppress weeds, which we'll come on to in a second. But if you're going to do compost, have a little think of the way you're going to do it. So 50-50 browns and greens. Browns might include your dry materials, leaves, wood chips, straw, sawdust, and these provide the kind of the bulk of your compost, and they're going to aerate your compost mix, and they're really high in carbon, which is something that is essential for nutrients. Your greens are the things that you might add in, which are your kind of leafy things, nutritious materials, fruit and veg scraps, eggshells, grass clippings, bit of coffee grounds, recently pulled up weeds, that kind of thing. And these are high in nutrients, and these supply nutrients. So thinking about your NPK and nitrogen and things, that's what that'll provide. And together they form a nice compost. Hot composting is just a process where it's done in a confined kind of tub, which you can regulate the conditions inside, and it just speeds the whole process up a bit. So you might not have to wait quite as long until your compost is ready. And you can also use green manure. So green manure is seeds that we sow in a bed that's not in use. So if we've got a bed where we're thinking we're going to grow trees the following year, in the year where it's not growing trees, we can sow things like buckwheat or mustard or fleecia, and these will grow up. These will grow in the soil, and they fix nitrogen things from the atmosphere. And then what we do is that we just dig them straight into the soil after they've grown, and they'll just rot down, and they'll just fertilize that soil and make it a better soil. See, weeding is another thing that we can do. but we need to be careful about what we call weeds. So weeds can be amazing for, they are amazing for biodiversity. They're and things like nettles here, amazing for pollinators. So only weed what you need really. If it's around the base of the trees and smothering your trees, try and weed those. But if they're not around your trees, if they're just in your community tree nursery, and you're not too worried about them, they can provide really good source of pollen for pollinators. But they can also be really beneficial. So if you have a strip of wildflowers, which could be seen as weeds in some circumstances, running alongside parallel to your trees but not around them, they can provide some shade, which can then shade the roots and prevent the roots from drying out and things like that. So they can be beneficial as well. We don't recommend herbicides or pesticides, but some nurseries do use them, and Phil will talk about a little bit about that in a bit. So weeds, the way we can deal with them, we can pull them by hand. We can use a hoe carefully, or we can prevent them by spreading mulch around the base of trees, or compost. So we can use mulch like wood chips or compost. And if you are removing weeds, add them to your compost heap and break them down and add those nutrients back into your system. So mulching, it's not just for trees growing in when we plant them out. So this is a willow nursery that's planted in a school in Birmingham that Phil did this year. And those willow rods are going to grow up and going to be used as stock to be able to supply willow and grow more willow in the local area. So with mulch, we want to add a layer 5 to 10 centimeters thick around the trees. We don't want to smother the base of the stems, but what this does is that it prevents weed growth. It locks in moisture, regulates soil temperature, so it keeps them cool in the summer, but it also raises the temperature a little bit in the winter. Improves the soil structure by preventing compaction and releasing nutrients into soil. And yeah, you can use lots of different things. So you can create your own leaf mold with fallen leaves. That's the kind of nature's natural way of mulching. Or a very common way of mulching is with wood chip. And there's quite often questions about whether or not you should buy fresh wood chip or rotted down wood chip. And what we mean by fresh wood chip is wood chip that has literally just been chipped. So this might be a tree surgeon who has just done some works and they've chipped that tree and it's come straight to you, and that's what we call fresh. So it's not been rotted down. And there's some pros and cons of using both. Fresh wood chip tends to be cheaper. It tends to be very readily available. It's a great barrier to weeds. It's good for soil moisture and retention insulation. But there are a couple of downsides that you might need to be aware of. So because it's fresh, it means that it's not been rotted down. So it will begin to rot down when you apply it around the base of your trees. Now, the microorganisms that break the wood chip down require nitrogen to do that. So they will often draw that up from the soil, and it can deplete the nitrogen in your soil. And obviously, if it's depleting the nitrogen in your soil, that nitrogen is not available for your trees. So you might need to think about adding some nitrogen to offset the losses you'll get from fresh wood chip. If you're getting fresh wood chip, make sure you're getting it from a reputable supplier. If you've got a tree surgeon who has just taken a tree down with something like honey fungus, or God forbid something like amalaria or something, any nasty infection which you don't want to be going into your tree, if they've cut those things down, they should be disposing of those properly. So just try and choose a good supplier for wood chip. And if you're getting wood chip, try not to make it 100% conifer wood chips. They tend to be very acidic, and it can just raise the acidity of your soil. Rotted down wood chip is a little bit harder to come by sometimes. It's a bit more expensive, but it does similar jobs. It's really good for weeds. It's a really great source of nutrients immediately, so it doesn't need to wait to be rotted down. It is always already rotted down. It can release those nutrients back into the soil. And because it's been rotted down, the organisms, the microorganisms that have done that rotting down, will quite often have killed off any pathogens that are in there. So it can actually have less of the unfavorable unfavourable pathogens and more of the beneficial soil microbes that we might want in and around our growing trees. At this time of year, we might want to be doing some netting and fencing. So shade netting does what it says on the tin. It can provide a bit of shade and also some shelter to our trees to make sure they're not getting too hot, make sure they're not getting blown too much. And things like insect and butterfly netting can sometimes have a little bit of a higher, a larger diameter, and they protect against insect pests, things like butterflies, which go and lay eggs on your trees. And those larvae then emerge and then they eat your leaves. So it can prevent the butterflies actually landing on your trees. And because the diameter of the net's a little bit wider, it lets light in, but it doesn't, but not the insects. Susceptible trees to insects, insect pests are things like your fruit trees, birch, oak, alder, willow, those kind of things. And it'd be interesting to hear in the chat what species tend to get munched the most by you. So if you pop that in the chat as well, we can have a look at those in a bit. And also thinking about fencing trees off if necessary, but this only comes if you're in a site where you know you've got pests like deer or rabbits. So don't just go fencing your site to be extra sure, because it can be quite expensive and time consuming to fence your site. Make sure that you know you've got these things in your local area, and if they're a problem, then think about fencing them off. Okay, and then a great thing to be doing this year is this time of year is forecasting. So May is probably the best time for tree flowers, and we've still got lots of trees in flower now. And you might have seen some incredible trees in flower near you and thought they're going to produce lots of seed, lots of flower, big high floral abundance. We get lots of seed from. So we might want to think about making notes of where these good trees are, to go back to in autumn to collect seeds. We might want to think about where the land is that they're on. So do I need to find the landowner? You should always get landowners' permission before picking seed from the trees, especially if it's in private land. So yeah, begin thinking about what trees and what species you might need for next season. Begin thinking about connecting to local tree planting projects, finding out what trees you're going to need, so that then when you're out and about and on your walks, you can start spotting trees that are looking particularly good for seed this coming year. We did our seed gathering masterclass last autumn, which we've done a recording of, so that's available on our YouTube channel. We'll send the link around after as well. And likewise, if you're planning what seeds you're gonna collect and what trees you're gonna grow, you want to start thinking about the space and the conditions that you need to grow those trees. In the previous webinar, we talked about the space that you might need for certain numbers of trees. So forecasting and thinking ahead of how much bed space or how many pots you might need to grow those trees and where they're going to go in your tree nursery is a really good thing to be doing at this time. Okay, but that is enough from me at the moment, and we'll go over to Karen. So Karen, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for coming along. I should say as well, we'll do Karen's section now, and then we'll have a question and answer section for Karen's. And if you've got any questions for me for the section I've just done, we'll do that at the very end. So shall I share my screen, Karen? And
yes, please do.
Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm from Easton College in Norfolk, and in September we started the Community Tree Nursery and Wildflower Drift. Thank you. So we were given a very overgrown corner of an orchard on the campus. I teach two classes. One is a small group of interns, and the other is a group of 6 students that are studying to try and get into the workplace. All my students have additional needs, mild learning difficulties, but they've done this project pretty much by themselves. Thank you. So we had to do lots of clearing to start with. Nettles, we had to take down the old rabbit fencing, which had been up for decades, which was a mega job. Just sort of clearing the ground, trying to level it out a bit so that we could get our structures in place. So that involved getting out massive lumps of concrete, which were really heavy, but the students worked really hard on that, and lots of good teamwork was happening. So we bought a 25-foot polytunnel, which is fantastic. So we use that as an outdoor classroom. It's very hot in the moment, so we've just got a few palms growing in there, not much else. But we did bring on lots of tomatoes, in fact, to sell, and various other sort of non-trees that we sell on our market stall to help make money. Thank you. So we bought a shed as well, 15 by 12-foot shed, which is great. We keep all our sort of stock and tools in there, and it's a really nice shed. Thank you. So autumn time, we started collecting the seeds, and as Will was saying, we use this Tree Growers Guidebook as our Bible, and I've been doing some classes with Adam, who helped collaborate with the book. Very interesting, very knowledgeable man, and also very free with his knowledge, which is wonderful. So definitely recommend that. You can download it off the website as well. So general rules of seed collecting are, thank you, well, oh, it hasn't come up. So we went seed collecting, students being daft. And then we processed the seeds, which is a very therapeutic thing to do. It's a bit like slow cooking, because it doesn't happen quickly. It's very important to label your seeds as you go, because it's very easy to get your hornbeam confused with your white beam and things like that. Okay. So I think we skipped a slide back there. It is important to ask permission when you're seed collecting. I think it's illegal if you don't, in fact, so really important. And people usually are very kind and happy to let you go on their land and collect seeds, especially if you're going to do it like us. So we only wanted local seeds, so we just asked the principal and local farmers that sort of are adjacent to the farm. So we use these cells for propagation, and in the middle picture there, they're putting together the wind pots, which I'll talk about in a minute. We built the raised beds, and we did it in a sort of permaculture way where we didn't dig into the soil. We put lots of shredded paper and all our cardboard and newspaper, and made a sort of deep bed before we added any soil and compost to the raised bed. And that's helping with the holding the water quite well. Thank you. So we have a borehole, which does have slightly low pressure this time of year. So we put in a water butt at each side of the shed, and that's been fantastic. We get a lot of water in our water butts. Mind you, the weather seems to have got a bit hotter now, so it's important to capture your water if you can. So here's the bottom picture is the wind pots that we are trialing, and they are quite useful because when the roots go near the holes, they retract back into the pot, so you don't get roots coming out. So you can actually put these on the ground, and the tree won't grow into the ground, as it were. They stay contained in the pot with a really good root system. So when you undo the pot, and they are reusable, you've got a good, nice root system growing in there. They are quite expensive, but I think you can use them quite a few times, whereas the cells in the picture above I think you can really only use them a couple of times. You do need to really clean all your cells when you're reusing to avoid cross-contamination. And they are a bit brittle, the tree cells in the top picture, and they do crack quite easily, but I think we get two uses out of them, possibly 3 if we're careful. Thank you. So we've just been looking at our biosecurity. We've got one of these boot wash, we dip it into the mixture to neutralize what you're bringing into the site, and also a brush to help take off any mud before you get in. We're just about to get a hand wash station set up. We haven't got that yet, so that'll be good. And looking at having a quarantine area for plants that are, getting a bit poorly. But so far, we've been really lucky with pests and diseases, but we're still early days, really. Thank you. So this is just a sort of look at our year. So autumn, harvesting seed, making sure it's labeled and stored in a cool place. And then as we go into the winter months, start processing the seeds. We did stratify quite a few in the freezer and the fridge last year, which was quite successful. Always label and date really clearly, again, because you can easily get confused about what seed's in front of you if you don't do that. So springtime, weeding, mulching, strimming, putting on seedlings, cleaning, propagation tables ready for stock. And summertime, we're planting out. We're trying to get as much out of our cells at the moment into the ground for the summer, because like Matt, we have the long summer holiday, and so we're putting up a little bit of shade netting. That was really interesting seeing your slide, Will, on what plants like what. Because I'll have to go in and water throughout the summer because we haven't got a sprinkling system yet. But hopefully with the permaculture mulch that's already in the bed, that will help hold the water. We tend to give each raised bed a 10-minute soak with our sprinkler, with our hand lance, and so that goes quite deep into the ground. So we're cleaning out pots that we've been using, getting them ready for the next time. We're setting up a quarantine area, and we're also stock taking. At the moment, we've got 470 seedling trees. We've got quite a few. We got some from the tree council, we've got 6 fruit trees and a few hedging plants that are sort of 6 months ahead of our other stock. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Any questions?
All right. Thank you so much for that, Karen.
Thank you.
Really interesting to see how you've gone from a space which was around your orchard, and you managed to transfer it into an orchard / community tree nursery. So those orchard trees are still there. That's brilliant. Got some questions in the question answer. I'll just have a look at those.
The alder leaf beetle, I know about that. I think we've got maybe 2 that have got it at the moment, so we've separated them from the rest. We're keeping a close eye on that. Thanks for the question.
Okay, have you?
Are there any?
So
more?
we've got is rainwater better? Rainwater is more ideal because obviously you're not using up your any water from other water sources. So if you can use rainwater, always do, but I appreciate that it's quite difficult to do for the amount you might need. Have we got any more questions for Karen? We've got some of these which are more broader questions, which you'll come on to at the end, question answer.
Okay. So the bottom one there about the volunteers, so it's completely student led, and myself and I work with a job coach as well. So there's two staff and overall 10 students from 2 different groups. So yeah, they've worked really hard on it, and it's lovely to see how engaged they are with it. Really, really good.
Brilliant. Where do you intend to plant your trees?
Well, the college estate wants as many hedgerow trees as possible. They said they'd take at least 2,000 a year, so that's good. We work closely with the local tree wardens because the students do quite a lot of tree planting as part of their work experience. And so that, if we have a glut of anything, we'll happily exchange or pass on with the tree wardens. And also the students work at a big park, Whitlingham, and they had some storm damage on some beech trees, and we've done really well with propagating seed from their trees. So we've started to give them back some young trees, which they'll plant out again. So that's a nice sort of circle of community practice.
Brilliant. And do you always work from seed, or sometimes do you ever go out and dig tiny saplings that you see?
Well, we've propagated willow, but it was goat willow, and that apparently is notoriously bad at setting root. But it is growing. Most of it, I think, about 75% of it's taken. We haven't actually dug up any yet, but I have been looking at a few pear trees in the orchard, thinking, oh, we could actually dig up a few little babies there and rescue them. So mainly it's seed at the moment.
Okay, and from Wallace, said, would you sink pots to water below the soil surface? Does that mean? I assume that means to putting pots, sink them underneath the soil surface. I think that I would say essentially not to do that, just simply because you might end up with pooling water, and any pooling water is potentially going to lead to waterborne diseases and things like that. Last question from me, Karen. What's the next steps for the nursery?
The next steps. Well, that'll be really to sort of make sure that we look after our trees through the summer. And in the autumn, our sort of older hedgerow plants we'll be able to move them on and start collecting seed again, start the cycle. Because I think really for a new nursery, it's a 2-year cycle really to get your trees anywhere near ready to move on. So we're still at the early stages of growing. And we had some people out yesterday from one of the local community. They helped us with a grant in the early stages, Community Foundation Council, and we were asking if there might be some more funding so that we could build a permanent shade area to work in. We've got a big tent at the moment, but it'd be nice to have something permanent. So I'm going to look into that. So looking at grants and just trying to, make it. The other thing that I'm looking at, sorry, I'm rambling a bit, is how to do a SOPRA report to look at the pests and diseases. And so that's a whole learning curve for me, and Adam's helping me with that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for putting that together.
Thank you.
Telling us all about
everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll see you soon. Okay, so we'll now go to our jobs for the weekend with Phil. So Phil's our head of major tree planting projects, and he's brilliant with tree propagation. He's going to talk to you about feeding, and also some of the jobs that you can do with grafted fruit trees at this time of year. So I'm just going to share my screen, share the sound. 2 seconds. Okay.
When it comes to applying foliar feed to plants, there's different methods that you can use and different bits of equipment. Kind of the very, very basic bit of kit tried and tested is just to use a standard watering can. Here we've got a standard 10 litre watering can, which has got a good volume. I'd always recommend that you use a rose on the end of the can, just to make the application of the foliar feed a little bit more gentle. And you can see here I've got an example of some liquid seaweed feed which is a great option for providing micronutrients to your growing seedlings. Again, with the liquid feeds, we're going to come onto this in a bit more detail later on. You dilute them down, so you can see this is a concentrated feed, so you only need a small volume, and it's approximately a capful to a watering can. So you're looking at potentially one or two caps, or probably 2 caps to this 10-litre can, 1 cap to half the can to 5 litres. So really depending on the volume of your watering can. So again, this probably isn't my preferred method for applying a liquid feed, but again, you may not have other sprayers available to you, so it's going to be a good basic option and better than nothing potentially. So an alternative option for you would be to be maybe thinking about using a handheld sprayer like this. So this is quite a small volume handheld sprayer. If you were just looking to do a small number of plants, again, very, very cheap. These can be picked up from, you know, as little as 50p to £1. From Pound Stretcher, so again, it's not going to break the budget, and again, this would maybe be a next step up, but if you were only going to be doing a small number of plants. Our next option would be this pump action handheld sprayer. So again, this is a slightly larger unit, so this is a 2-litre unit, and you can pressurize this by pumping the handle on the top, and again, it's got an adjustable nozzle, so it's going to give you a good range of different sprays, from a jet to a fine mist. This is quite a handy little unit. Again, doesn't cost much, so you know, you're probably looking at a few quid, maybe £5 or £6 for a unit like this, and they're readily available. And again, it gives you an opportunity to mix up a reasonable volume of spray. So 2 litres is going to go, you know, a reasonable distance, and treat quite a number of seedlings that you might have growing in trays. So this would be ideal if you're working within a greenhouse environment potentially, and where you've got seedlings that are in seed trays or moved on to root trainers, and you can just work your way around providing a foliar feed to those seedlings. So you can see we've got some solution in here. So in this case, we've got some seaweed feed in there ready for application. So the next option up for those that are working at scale and maybe have a large number of trees that they want to apply a foliar feed to, you can look at a backpack sprayer. So there's a range of different sprayers that are available on the market. And here we've got a good example of a backpack sprayer with a lance. And this provides a great way that you can take quite a large volume of foliar feed with you. This could potentially be out into the nursery or into a larger greenhouse. The wand's ideal because you can actually very easily spray on the underside of the leaves as well as the surface of the leaves, and it will also allow you to reach into tables and benches. So if you've got trays laid out on wide benches, it can be very easy to help you with that application. Very, very useful if you're foliar feeding saplings that are growing in a bed. So you've got saplings actually out in the nursery growing in a bed in the field. You can walk around and apply the foliar feed using a wand there. So this would probably be my preferred method when you're treating plants at scale. It just makes the application very easy and means that you can do a large quantity at a time. It's also good if you're maybe treating more mature trees. So these might be if you're growing smaller fruit trees, for example, or you're growing containerized trees to a slightly larger size compared to the root trainers. So yeah, great bit of kit. Just very important, do make sure that you're thoroughly triple rinsing and sterilizing between applications. You want to make sure that the equipment is clean and it's not going to be carrying any risk of kind of infection from fungus and such. And again, you want to make sure if you're using it for different chemicals, so often these will be used for either a herbicide potentially or a pesticide application, that you're cleaning it thoroughly to make sure that you minimize the risk of that impacting on your plant. So a lot of nurseries may well have organic principles, so they'd only be using their spray kit for foliar feeds and organic treatments, which is the ideal. You could maybe have separate bits of kit for your herbicides and pesticides if you do use them, and separate kit for your foliar feeds, just to minimize that risk of infection. But again, if you are using good hygiene and triple rinsing between applications, that shouldn't be a problem. Right, I'm just going to talk you through a couple of different options that you have for your foliar feed. So you can see we've got a a couple of different ready-made options that you can purchase. So we've got a couple of different types of seaweed feed here. So concentrated seaweed feeds. Maxi Crop is another very well-known example that's used commercially. And again, these are great for providing micronutrients to our developing seedlings. You always have the option as well, if you wanted to make your own liquid feeds. You can make those from plants that you'll find readily growing within the nursery or garden. So on the right here, we've got some nettles. So nettles make an excellent liquid feed, good with micronutrients and good for nitrogen. And then also on the left, we've got some comfrey here as well. So if you have a look, you can see the nice comfrey flowers there as well. So comfrey is very well known for being a liquid feed. Again, those big fleshy leaves are great when they decompose. It's quite a deep-rooted plant, so it's very, very good for pulling nutrients from low down in the soil and then locking it up within the leaves that can then be released when you make a liquid feed. So generally what we would do, we would harvest our source plant, so our nettles or comfrey. We'd pop it into a Hessian bag, possibly a sandbag or something like that, and then we tie it off and submerge it in a water butt for a couple of weeks. And then as the plant decomposes into the water, it's going to release that nutrients in the form of a liquid feed that can be then taken off and utilised as either a foliar feed in the same way that we applied it earlier, or you could well just use it as a soil drench. So you could water it into your beds and borders. So what we're particularly keen to provide this time of year, so we want to be providing some of those trace elements and the micronutrients. We're not so interested in providing nitrogen to our plants. We more want to be encouraging kind of that healthy root development and general plant vigor, rather than lots and lots of green leafy growth. So we're really looking to strengthen the root system of the plant and also its general health. So we're really interested in kind of trace elements, micronutrients, and maybe more the potassium and phosphorus than we are in providing the nitrogen that's going to give us lots of green leafy growth. So a couple of options there. You could also think about maybe making a compost tea. So in that way you take some of your regular garden compost and you put it in a Hessian bag in a very, very similar way that we would with the comfrey and nettles, and then you would often aerate that mix and provide some food. So again, you could potentially provide a little bit of molasses to feed all the active microorganisms within that, and then that can provide you with a compost tea, which you can use in a very similar way just to kind of boost the health of the soil and the activity of your soil of your growing seedling. It's a little bit of a more involved process, but that may well be something that we look at in a little bit more detail within another video later on. So here you can see we've got a nice tray of root trainers, so some cell-grown trees, and you can see this time of year is great for just giving your trees a little bit of a check and a little bit of maintenance. So as you can see, this tree's been growing in the nursery, and we've got quite a lot of kind of old petals that have fallen down, so there's a risk potentially there that they're going to be causing some fungal infection if you let those decompose around the base of the seedlings. And then you can also see that we've got some weeds that have got in there. So we've got some willow herb that seeded itself within the oak seedling. So again, very important, we want to be removing any of these weed seedlings that have got in and trying to get them out by the root. Again, they're going to be competing for nutrients with our lovely little oak seedlings that are in there. So it's just a nice opportunity, just sort of some general good hygiene and a good clean round. You can see we've got a few more weed seedlings there that are just getting in the back. So try and get them out by the root if you can, and give these a really nice clean over. So if you have a look now, you can see we've cleaned off the root trainers. So we've got a lovely clean tray, removing all of the debris from around the seedlings and also any weeds that have got in there. So we've removed that competition. I want to apply a foliar feed now, just to give the seedlings some nutrition and some micronutrients. So it's actually the ideal time to be applying a foliar feed. So we're actually in early evening, the sun's gone in and the temperature's cooling. So there's minimal risk of us scorching our seedlings, which is a big issue if you're applying during the peak of the day, during the hot sunshine. So ideally, any kind of foliar feeding and irrigation wants to be either early in the morning before it warms up or early evening, and you'll get much better absorption of feeds and irrigation into the soil and less evaporation at that time, and also minimising the risk of scorching. So in this instance, we've got quite a small seed tray here, so I'm just going to use a small spray applicator, handheld spray applicator, because I don't need much, and I've got a diluted solution of seaweed feed in here, which is great for all the micronutrients. And I'm going to very simply just apply my foliar feed to the plants. So I'm trying to get it on all of the tops of the leaves initially, and then I'm also going to then apply my mixture to the underside of the leaves as well. So I'm applying that into the underside of my seedlings, so we're getting it on the tops and the bottoms of the leaves, like so. And then it's also really useful, we can actually apply some of our liquid feed to the surface of the soil. So as well as the ability of the plants to take it in as a foliar feed through the leaves, it can also be taken in through the actual growing medium as well. So we've got a nice opportunity that we can apply a little bit of an extra feed there into the soil, and that'll be taken up through the roots. Okay, so really simple. So that's a really simple demonstration of how we would apply a foliar feed to our oak seedlings. In this case, ideally you want to be thinking about maybe making an application every couple of weeks. So again, you don't need to be doing this on a daily basis. You want to be providing, the nutrients on a regular basis during the growing season, and that will just help with the vigor of your plants and just make sure they're in a really, really good condition with all those micronutrients while they're putting on that active growth. So I'm going to talk a little bit about fruit tree production. So again, you may well be growing fruit trees on your community tree nursery, as well as kind of native trees from seed. So here we've got a great example of some trees that we produced on a project through a graft. So these were actually some saddle grafts that we carried out between November and February of last year. And if you have a look, you can see they've actively come into growth, which is great news. So we can be doing a little bit of routine maintenance on these now, just to kind of support them within the growing season. And something that we're looking to do now is to be removing some of the growth that's coming from the rootstock. So if you have a look here, we've got a really nice example of a grafted fruit tree. This is actually a golden rennet that's growing on an MM106 rootstock. So this is semi-vigorous rootstock. And if you have a look, this is our graft union, and we've got our rootstock below and our scion above, and you can see we've got this active growth coming on our scion now, which means that our graft has been successful, which is great news. But you can also see we've got this additional growth that's actually coming from the rootstock, so that's coming from below the graft union. Now that we know that the graft's been successful, we don't need to retain this growth lower down. So I'm just going to very, very simply nip off our shoots that were coming from the rootstock, because we don't want those. We want the tree now to push a lot of energy up and really encourage the growth in this top section of our scion, of our actual variety. You can see we've got a very similar situation happening with this grafted tree here. So we've got our successful scion, our variety that's grown on, and then I'm just going to nip off, so this little bit of growth that's coming from the rootstock, I'm going to nip that off, and that's going to then improve the growth of that plant. And then lastly, we've got the same situation here, and again, this is another golden rennet. with our MM106 rootstock. So very important that we need to make sure that we label these so that we can keep track of them in the nursery, and so that when we provide them, we know the final size of the tree there, that it's growing on a semi-vigorous rootstock. So again, I'm just going to be nipping off these little sections on the rootstock. Okay, and then that's going to encourage the tree to push lots more energy up to that scion up at the top, and that will really get away now. Again, we can apply a foliar feed to these developing apples in a very similar way that we did to the oak seedlings, just applying it to the leaves, and we could put a little bit of a drench into the soil as well. So again, these will be happy to grow on, and then hopefully we'll have these available for people to plant out in the coming autumn as they move into dormancy. We've just gone past the summer solstice, so we can start thinking about maybe doing some other propagation of fruit trees. So doing some more grafting, some summer grafting, and we could actually look at doing a tea bud. So doing some chip budding or some tea budding, which is a summer grafting technique when the trees are actively growing, because we need to have some movement of the sap through the tree under the bark to allow us to actually open up this bark to insert a bud. Here in front of you, you can see an example of a tree that we've carried out a tea budding technique on, and the main part of the branch that you can see, this is an M27 rootstock. So this is a very dwarfing rootstock that will produce a very small apple tree suitable for a step over or something similar. And you can see that we've actually grafted on a bud of Discovery. So our scion is a Discovery apple, and the rootstock here is M27. So now is the ideal time of year. So kind of as we start moving into early July, end of June, early July is an ideal time. We need to make sure that this sap is actively moving within the tree. So this is a type of grafting that we do during the growing season, because we actually cut open the bark and then we're inserting a bud under the bark there, and so we need the sap to be actively moving, or we wouldn't be able to peel back the bark at all. So if you have a look here, I've got a nice example of a bud. So this is a bud that I've actually cut from our scion material, and it's good to leave the leaf stalk on there so that you can handle the bud easily. And what we've done, we've just made a little T cut, so a straight line and a vertical line on our rootstock. We've peeled that open, and then very carefully we've inserted in our bud of our variety, pushed back the bark back over, and then we've used grafting tape to seal that union. So again, that's sealed from infection, and that's going to prevent any water getting in while the cambium layer of the bud fuses with the cambium layer of the rootstock. So again, this time of year within the nursery, if you are doing fruit tree production, is an ideal time to start thinking about starting to execute your bud grafting techniques.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Phil. That was super interesting. I always find all your grafting stuff really interesting. It's yeah, it's a difficult thing to do, but it's really impressive. And just so everybody knows, we've got Phil and my colleague Annie did a really good session all about grafting and propagation last seed collection season. So when we send around the links to what we talked about today, that will be in there. The recording of that will be in there as well, and that kind of goes through all those kind of slightly more technical terms you heard, like T cuts and grafting and the different sizes of the rootstock and all those kind of things, if you want to learn more there. But yeah, thanks for that, Phil. I was wondering if you could tell me about some feed. So that was a foliar feed you were doing. Can you tell us what the difference is between foliar feeding and say a ground soap, or why would you do either of them?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, foliar feeding is great because it's very quick. So the feed's taken in very quickly through the leaves. So it acts very fast. In this case, we were kind of recommending using just a general all-round liquid feed for micronutrients. But again, if you did have a deficiency, so you spoke earlier on, Will, about seeing deficiency signs within the leaves, it probably would be more effective for you to use a foliar feed because it will act very quickly in comparison to a feed that you're putting in through the soil. So again, you can do both. You can do a root drench that will be beneficial, but it'll be slower acting.
Okay.
So really, the key thing is that it's quite fast acting.
That's brilliant. Okay, and linking in with that, there was Kate's asked, is it better to apply foliar feed than to pot the seedlings up? I have lots of wild privet seedlings which are quite densely planted, and I'm wondering whether I should transplant them or perhaps feed instead.
I mean, feeding's obviously very useful, and if your seedlings have depleted all the nutrients within the growing medium, whatever you're growing them in, then obviously providing a liquid feed will keep them going. It will improve the health and vigor of the plants, and it might be that if you're growing as part of CTN activities, you want them a particular size because they're going to be easier to distribute. If they're that size, you don't want to be potting them up too big because then you're going to be encouraging more root growth. You're going to have a bigger plant that then is probably going to be a little bit more difficult to distribute. So obviously, if you're trying to grow cell-grown trees, you want to keep them a reasonably compact size. So the liquid feeding would be great to keep them in good health, good nutrition. But if you did want to grow bigger specimens, obviously there's no issue about increasing the pot size and them getting bigger, but obviously they may not then be suitable for shipping out to projects that might want to do a hedgerow or something like that. So I would generally say try and keep them in the same, the same size growing pot if you've got a final destination where they're going to go for a particular size.
Okay, and Anne's written the same question that I've written down, which is, what's the dose that we need for homemade feed? So obviously you had your nettle and your comfrey there, and you can use things like borage. Kind of how much roughly of those ingredients do we need to be putting into water, and how much water for it to make a good feed?
It does really vary in terms of what you use. And so there's lots of different options of what you can use for your liquid feed. So some of the ones I make kind of a worm compost, and you get a liquid feed from that. And then I also have a hot composter. They tend to be quite concentrated, those feeds. So you need less of that, and you dilute them more heavily. So in the same way with the seaweed feed, it's kind of recommended that you use a couple of capfuls to about 10 litres. So it is a very, very diluted solution. With things like the nettle and the comfrey, you tend to actually do quite a large volume of water. So if you're using vegetation and popping it into a large water butt, you probably don't need to dilute it so much. So again, you'd be using it maybe half and half or a quarter to half, so 50-50 or 25-75. With a feed like that, and you'll notice it in the color as well. So often if you have a look at the color of something like a worm feed or a seaweed feed, it's going to be very, very dark and concentrated. Whereas if you actually have a look at your kind of finished nettle feed or a comfrey feed, it will be a lighter color, that it won't be as concentrated.
Great, thank you. And just for people who don't know what worm feed is, what's a worm feed?
So that would be if you do worm composting, so you can have a wormery bin at home, which are great. I would highly recommend them, and you can put a lot of your vegetable scraps and kitchen scraps and things like that into a worm bin. The worms will break it down, and they will give you a really nice, good quality compost, which is quite good for growing seeds in. You can use it as a potting compost, and they also produce a liquid that comes off as part of that process, which again can be used as a very nutritious liquid feed. So yeah, it's good liquid feed.
Okay, and on the you're trimming off some of the lower branches, obviously below the graft line of those fruit trees. But Mark's asked, should I be trimming off lower branches of alders as they grow, as their upward growth has slowed somewhat?
I wasn't sure, so I've been having a bit of answering back and forth with Mark around. It was alder leaf beetle that we had an issue with, and I think we were trying to find a good solution for the alder leaf beetle. So what I would say, I wouldn't necessarily trim lower branches unless you need to. So obviously when you're growing a young tree, you want it to have a reasonably nice equal shape, rather than removing all of the lower branches and just leaving the top growth. It will really depend on whoever has that tree as a final tree in terms of what sort of form they're going to grow that into. So for example, if they did want to grow it in a hedgerow. They might plant it and then they may potentially coppice it after a couple of years to get it to regenerate from the bottom. If they wanted to grow that as a standard tree, it might be more beneficial leaving those lower branches on. So then the final owner, whoever places it finally, its final position, can decide what form they want that tree to be in finally. So I would always say don't remove lower growth if you can avoid it. Wait till it gets to its final destination and then decide what will be the final form of that tree. How are we going to grow it? Is it going to be a hedgerow? You know, is it going to be a topiary tree? Is it going to be a straight standard? And then you'll use the branches accordingly depending on that final form.
Okay. On that note as well, is there are some tree species that you might prune in summer and some you might do in a different time like winter. Does that apply to trees in the nursery as well?
It would do. So I mean the general rule, anything in the prunus family, so anything with a stone in the middle, particularly when dealing with fruit trees, for example, so that might be your cherries and your plums and things like that. We tend to try and prune those during the growing season, when they're actively growing, because it reduces the risk of them getting silverleaf infection. So yes, I mean do check if you're unsure around pruning times for trees. You know, have a look at some guidance to make sure that you're doing it at the right time of year. I generally recommend that it is quite good to prune your trees on an annual basis as well, because obviously if you're pruning on an annual basis, you can minimize the size of your pruning cuts. So you can be taking off a little shoot when it's very young, rather than waiting till 5 years down the road where it's a much bigger branch. You can leave a bigger wound and you've a much bigger chance of opening it up to infection. So I would say, don't just plant a tree and let it go, then come back to it when it's a problem. Plant a tree, look at it every year, and then shape it and give it some form every year as you move forward.
Okay, thanks. But you might, if there was some slightly unhealthy looking shoots, or shoots that branches that were looking like they were a little bit paler, you might take those off to prioritize larger shoots.
Yeah, well, the general principle is the 3Ds. So you have the 3Ds of dead, diseased, or damaged. So again, when you're assessing your seedlings, if you have any dead wood that's in there, remove that. Any disease, any signs of disease, remove that, and probably better to incinerate it or burn it. Or again, any damaged wood, so where there might have been a branch that's been knocked or snapped, that's a perfect place that infection can get in, where you've got that, you've got the more fibrous tissue. You want a nice clean cut, so you want to take that off. So any of the 3Ds, generally remove all of those and treat all of those if you can. And it is always good. So if you can be sterilizing your pruning tools as well, so quite useful to have a little sprayer just with some sterilizing fluid and a cloth, just so you can be continuously throughout the day wiping off your tools. It just helps with good hygiene as you're sort of moving around, particularly if you're taking off any diseased or potentially diseased wood that you're then removing. If you can then sterilize your tools before you move on to the next plant, or you're just going to be transferring that risk of disease over.
Brilliant, thank you. And one last question, conscious of time. What Johnny says, we've inherited quite a few what looks like spruce tree. I guess they're in cells, in little cell grown, and he wants to repot them. What size pots should he pot them on to?
So I suppose this comes back to that final use of the tree and what it's intended for. So generally the good rule is don't kind of jump up too big in size. It's always good to have a gentle progression up in size as the tree gets bigger. So don't go from a really, really small pot to a ginormous pot. It's much better to do a gradual increase. And then obviously what you've got to think about is the bigger that tree gets, the more difficult it's going to be to transport. The general rule with the Tree Council, we like to support people to plant trees as young as possible. So again, if you can keep the trees reasonably small and then they go off to their final destination and get planted, they'll probably establish a lot better than if you grow them onto a bigger tree within the nursery and then provide them as a bigger tree. They'll have kind of larger establishment requirements when they get to the other end, their final destination. So I'd always say try and supply reasonably modest sized trees, and they'll generally do better and establish quicker. So if you had a look at the fruit trees that we had in the demo there, the grafted trees, ideally we're gonna try and get those planted out this autumn when they're still reasonably small, because then they'll put down root really quickly and they'll get away a lot faster than if you were to plant a larger tree.
That's perfect. Thanks so much, Phil. Look at the time, we've come to the end. So thanks, Phil, for your time. Thanks, Karen, and thanks, Matt, as well. for all your hard work and helping with this. And thank everybody for coming along. It hasn't been letting me copy and paste all the links I wanted into the chat. So what we'll do is that when we send round the recording link, which we'll do after this, then I'll put all the links to all the different things that we've talked about today in there, as well as links to all our previous sessions and also the sign up link to our next session. And yeah, please do sign up to that, and hope to see you next time. Thank you so much for coming along.